Alright, welcome back. Tuning in. This is part 2 of Unlocking the Secrets of Thought with Clinical Hypnosis. My name's Hakeem Alexander, and you're in for quite a treat. Alright, so last I left off, I was talking about how I became more and more convinced of the validity of the systematic desensitization process, and partly came from the school I had graduated from, the Hypnosis Motivation Institute in Tarzana, California, and also for what I call the Bregan Withdrawal Protocol from psychiatrist Dr. Peter Bregan. I believe he's still right now at the in Ithaca at Cornell University. I follow him online. However, the very first thing I started off with was, this is a simple and practical guide. You can immediately start putting this stuff into practice. I've seen a lot of people have a lot of questions about their practice, and it seems like a lot of people are overcomplicating things. And it is worth repeating that this is not just for clinicians or new hypnotherapists. This is for lay people, also meaning people who don't have any degrees or certificates or anything like that. This is for anyone who wants to make significant changes in their lives with real practical strategies and tactics that they can put into place immediately, simply by understanding some of these vague psychological concepts, but that have behavioral components attached to them so that you can actually carry them out in your life. So the first thing that I talked about was the 4 stages of competence that comes from psychology, and I just simply relabeled it the 4 hypnotic stages of competence and changed the last part of it. So what you need to understand is that a lot of times you got to move yourself or your clients from the point where they are, which is called unconscious incompetence. They don't know what they don't know. Moving them into conscious incompetence, so they start to realize the things that are exactly wrong, what they need to start to fix. Then they move to conscious competence, where they're concentrating and focusing on and really working hard on fixing the things that they need to fix. And then they move to subconscious competence, whereas now it becomes second nature. They don't have to think about it all the time, sort of like getting in your car and driving to a familiar destination where you only remember like 1 or 2 things, whereas before, when it was new to you, you remembered like every single detail about the drive there. And that's when you were in conscious competence. You were following the GPS, and you had to follow every turn correctly and make sure you got there. And then after you've done it, 10, 20 times, or maybe for some people it's like 3 or 4 times, you are in subconscious competence, where you're not really thinking about it. You get there safely, and but it's there right in your subconscious. You could think about it if you wanted to, like if you wanted to change and take a shortcut or something like that, or take a scenic route, but you don't have to. And that's the subconscious rather than it being unconscious, where it's unknown. So I spoke about that, and that's like a good starting point for everybody to realize those 4 stages of competence, whether you stick with the ones that are from psychology strictly, or my short adaptation, my slight adaptation with what I call the 4 hypnotic stages of competence. Then I touched upon, first of all, something that I use an awful lot is systematic desensitization, because it works wonders, and it can be done quickly, or you can slow it down depending on how detailed you want to get and what the issue is that you're dealing with. And then the rationale about why I really understand how powerful it is, and why I believe in it so much, and what has convinced me of its validity. And so I'll just touch on that again really quickly, which was, first, I got a certification, a continuing education program on smoking cessation, or helping people to stop smoking cigarettes. And I noticed that something that worked a lot more, at a much higher percentage. So whereas I was getting like 50-50 with a lot of the other hypnotic techniques that I was using, I noticed that with the clients that I used, this behavioral strategy of systematically withdrawing the amount of cigarettes that they were smoking, rather than simply a lot of other techniques in hypnosis, by simply the behavioral strategy of incrementally decreasing the amount of cigarettes they were smoking. I was having a much higher rate of success that got to 9 out of 10. Sometimes it was like every single one, but I'd say that the rate is 98% using only that. And, as a hypnotist practicing, when I was in California mostly, I would have to put the person in a trance, but all I was actually really doing in the trance state after a certain point of seeing success with the incremental reduction of the amount of cigarettes smoked was to help them remember that, to remind them that that's what they were doing, to just kind of be their cheerleader. Okay, now, next week you're going from 17 cigarettes to 16. Okay, and then I learned about the Bregan withdrawal protocol, where he wrote a book called Your Drug May Be Your Problem, which is the main one where I got the information from, where he was explaining and outlining how to withdraw from some pretty heavy psychiatric medication known as atypical antipsychotics, or neuroleptics. And the issue with these things is that they can actually cause people to have psychotic symptoms where there were none, or to exacerbate people's symptoms that already have them. And so he showed how to lessen that significantly by just like in the smoking cessation protocol used, which is an incremental reduction in the dosage. And then I did 2 similar experiments on myself. One was, I used to smoke a lot of marijuana in California. I mean, it was just everywhere. And I smoked so much of it, and you can get it cheap, and the friends had it, and everybody had it, and I was smoking so much that I even published a blog, I think it was in 2008, on my website, hypnoathletics.com, called Snakes in the Grass, Marijuana Withdrawal and Myths. I think I'll look that up and see if that's... I know that's the title. And in there I talk about, things like how I would get sweaty and agitated, and how I had like an onslaught of dreaming activity and everything like that. So there are definitely withdrawal symptoms from smoking marijuana and stopping suddenly, because I would try to just stop cold turkey. And then I did my own version of this incremental reduction of dosage, and then noticed that there were no withdrawal symptoms. And then I did the same thing with caffeine. Even though I do drink a lot of coffee right now, I'm not going to try to front and act like I don't. I love coffee. But there were times where I wanted to stop, because, we'd hear all these things, and I would think to myself, okay, I want to stop and see if I can do this. So I would stop cold turkey, and I would have things happen, like I would get extreme headaches, and then feel like really tired and like dumb, like I couldn't think properly. So then I just did the systematic desensitization from the substance, both marijuana and caffeine, where I just did a incremental reduction in the dosage. And with things like that, I could be a little bit more cavalier than when somebody who would be withdrawing from an antipsychotic, for example, or cigarettes. But the effect was the same. It completely eliminated or reduced significantly any withdrawal symptoms that I would have had. And so things like that. So the smoking cessation, Capucinian cigarette withdrawal, or I don't know if it came from John Melton, who taught the smoking cessation program, but that whole idea of the incremental reduction of the amount of cigarettes smoked, that was one of the influences that helped me to solidify my understanding of how systematic desensitization works. Then there was the Bregan withdrawal protocol of atypical antipsychotics, also known as neuroleptics, from psychopharmacology. And then I did my own personal experimentation with quitting smoking marijuana, which I haven't for over 3 years now, and then with reducing caffeine to stop the withdrawal symptoms from caffeine, like headaches and lethargy and brain fog and things like that. So that right there are some really great supports for the systematic desensitization model that works a lot in clinical hypnosis for so many different things, because that's really, in essence, what we're working with a lot of times, is we're working to help systematically desensitize people from the issues that they have. And eventually what ends up happening is we're actually reassociating their experiences with different responses. And so we're going to get into that a little bit more. In this presentation, I have just over 4 minutes left, so we're going to do a part 3. But, so I've already covered the 4 hypnotic stages of competence. I've already covered the rationale and the foundation that supports the systematic desensitization model, which were the incremental cigarette withdrawal protocol from the Smoking Cessation Program. That's a continuing education course at the Hypnosis Motivation Institute. Then the Bregan withdrawal protocol for antipsychotics, neuroleptics from psychopharmacology. Then my own experiments of quitting marijuana completely, and then also reducing and stopping drinking coffee without any withdrawal symptoms or negative effects. And now we'll move on to some other really simple strategies that can be used. And right now, before I go on to part 3, I'll just touch on some areas where this is really effective. Systematic desensitization, and give a little bit of the rationale about why this could be as one of the simple staples and foundation that you use over and over in your practice. I mean, to fall back on when other things seem to not be working. So one of the things that we learn is that a lot of times people are responding by what we say is default. And the default is just because they're not conscious of the things that are causing them problems. Like we are not filtering the information that comes into our subconscious minds. So a lot of times people develop problems, and what happens is that they're very sensitive to responding in ways that are not good for them to the stimuli that are in their environment. So a person who is overeating, for example, or not eating healthy, or not exercising enough, and this is something that I have a lot of experience with, being a martial artist for over 20 years, and also being a fitness a professional for just as many years as well. A lot of times people are not are overly sensitized to negative cues, so they are responding to a certain emotion, they get depressed, and so then they eat a lot of sugar or drink a bunch of pop and stuff like that. Or even in the case of smoking cigarettes, other unhealthy habits, they get a little stressed out, and then they turn to these negative things like food and cigarettes and alcohol and so on and so forth. And it's because they're just very sensitive to the stimulus for that. And so systematic desensitization works in of course desensitizing, just like how we're incrementally reducing the amount of tobacco, nicotine, caffeine, or in the case of this, antipsychotics. And then it's been said that nature doesn't like a void or vacuum, or nature abhors the vacuum, so we don't just leave an empty space. We replace, or as I'm stating it, calling it reassociating. So that'll be the end of part 2. Stay tuned for part 3 of Unlocking the Secrets of Thought with Clinical Hypnosis. My name is Hakeem Alexander, founder of HypnoAthletics, and you're in for quite a great experience. Stay tuned.